It was an ordinary Wednesday morning for Noah Peterson, or at least, it appeared to be. The sun peeked through the blinds in his small bedroom, lighting up walls covered with posters of famous leaders, historic speeches, and a timeline of every U.S. president from George Washington to Joe Biden. At just 7 years old, Noah was anything but an average kid. Most boys his age spent their free time chasing soccer balls, building block towers, or mastering video games. Noah. He spent his afternoons reading about government policies, listening to debates, and studying the Constitution with the focus of a scholar. His parents had often joked that he seemed like an old soul trapped in a young body. But they also knew Noah wasn't playing games. His passion for politics was real, and it burned brighter than ever. Despite his age, Noah had a mind that could rival the sharpest adults in the room. He didn't just understand politics, he analyzed it. Over dinner, he'd casually discuss the checks and balances of power or argue why certain laws needed reform. His parents, teachers, and even local council members were astounded. "This kid is going places," his father would say with pride, shaking his head in disbelief after one of Noah's insightful rants. But for all his brilliance, Noah wasn't flashy or boastful. He was thoughtful and deliberate, always thinking 2 steps ahead. That's why, when he learned that Donald Trump would be holding a press event in his city, Noah didn't see it as a mere coincidence. To him, this was an opportunity, a chance to do something that could leave a mark, even if he was just a kid. Months before the event, Noah began preparing. He pored over videos of past press conferences, studying how questions were asked and answered. He made lists of topics he wanted to address, writing and rewriting questions until they were sharp and concise. He practiced his delivery in front of the mirror, pretending to hold a microphone, rehearsing how he'd speak clearly and confidently. "Why do you want to do this, Noah?" his mom had asked one evening, watching him scribble notes on a piece of paper. "Because kids should have a say too," he replied simply. "Grown ups think we don't understand, but we do. Someone needs to remind them." His mother didn't have a response, but the pride in her eyes was evident. She knew Noah was special, and while she worried about how others might perceive him, she couldn't deny his determination. The day of the event finally arrived. Noah woke up early, his tiny suit neatly pressed and his favorite red tie lying on the bed. He'd chosen it because he thought it gave him a serious look, one that might make adults take him more seriously. His father drove him to the venue, a sprawling conference hall already buzzing with activity. Outside, reporters and supporters milled about, some holding microphones, others holding signs. Cameras were being set up, and there was an electric energy in the air. Noah clutched his small notebook, filled with his carefully crafted questions. His hands trembled slightly, not from fear, but from excitement. "Are you sure you're ready for this, buddy?" his dad asked as they approached the entrance. Noah nodded. "I've never been more ready." Once inside, the room was even more chaotic. People scrambled to find seats, and the sound of chatter mixed with the hum of microphones being tested. Noah and his dad found a spot near the middle, close enough to see the stage but far enough to avoid being immediately noticed. He felt a flutter of nerves but pushed it down. This was his moment, and he couldn't let anything distract him. As the event began, Donald Trump entered the room, flanked by his team. The crowd erupted into applause and cheers, with some chanting his name. Noah observed everything carefully. He noted how Trump carried himself with confidence, how he commanded the attention of the entire room. But Noah wasn't intimidated. He had a plan, and he was sticking to it. The press conference began like any other. Reporters fired off questions, and Trump responded with his usual mix of charm and bravado. The audience laughed and clapped, eating up his remarks. Noah, however, was waiting for the right moment. He knew that timing was everything. At first, no one noticed the small boy sitting quietly with his notebook. To them, he was just another face in the crowd, perhaps a supporter's son tagging along. But Noah wasn't there to blend in. He was waiting for his opportunity to stand out. Finally, there was a lull in the questions, a brief pause where the room seemed to hold its breath. Noah seized the chance. He raised his hand, his small arm shooting up confidently. At first, no one paid attention. A few people glanced at him, confused by the sight of a child among seasoned reporters. One journalist even leaned over and whispered, "What's he doing here?" But Noah didn't waver. "Excuse me, Mr. Trump," he called out, his voice clear and unwavering. The room fell silent. Heads turned, and all eyes were suddenly on the 7-year-old boy in the neatly pressed suit. Even Trump paused, his expression shifting from amusement to curiosity. "Well, this is interesting," Trump said, gesturing toward Noah. "A little guy with a big question, I assume. Go ahead, kid. Let's hear it." Noah took a deep breath, clutching his notebook tightly. This was it, the moment he'd been preparing for. "Mr. Trump," he began, his voice steady despite the weight of the moment. "Do you believe that leaders should always prioritize honesty over popularity?" The question hung in the air like a challenge. The crowd murmured, some exchanging surprised glances. Trump's usual quick wit seemed to falter for a moment as he processed the unexpected question. Noah didn't flinch. His gaze remained locked on Trump, unwavering and full of determination. He wasn't here to embarrass anyone or seek attention. He was here to make a point, and he wasn't backing down. The cameras, once focused solely on Trump, now zoomed in on the young boy who had managed to silence a room full of adults. This was no ordinary Wednesday morning anymore. This was the day Noah Peterson would make his voice heard, and nothing would ever be the same again. For a moment, there was silence, the kind that makes every second feel like an eternity. Noah could feel hundreds of eyes on him, but he stood tall, determined not to show any sign of nervousness. His question, though simple in its wording, carried a weight that couldn't be ignored. Donald Trump, known for his quick comebacks and bold personality, gave a slight chuckle, as though trying to regain control of the room. "Honesty over popularity," he repeated, leaning slightly toward the microphone. "That's quite the question for someone your age. What's your name, son?" "Noah Peterson," the boy replied confidently. "Well, Noah," Trump began, straightening his posture, "that's a great question. I'd say leaders should always aim to be honest, but sometimes, the truth can be complicated. Wouldn't you agree?" Noah didn't miss a beat. "Complicated doesn't mean it shouldn't be told," he replied, his voice steady. The crowd murmured again, this time with a mix of admiration and disbelief. Who was this child? How could he speak with such clarity and confidence? Even the journalists, seasoned professionals who were used to fiery exchanges, found themselves captivated by the exchange. Trump, too, seemed momentarily taken aback. His usual charisma and control of the room were now being gently challenged by a 7-year-old who wasn't afraid to speak his mind. "You've got guts, kid," Trump said with a smirk. "But let me ask you this: do you think it's always easy to be honest when you've got millions of people watching your every move?" Noah paused for a moment, not because he didn't know how to respond, but because he wanted to make sure his words landed with the same impact as his first question. "No," he admitted, "I don't think it's easy. But I think it's necessary. If leaders can't be honest, how can people trust them? And if people don't trust their leaders, how can a country stay strong?" The room erupted into applause. It wasn't the typical partisan cheer that often followed Trump's remarks, but genuine applause, the kind reserved for someone who had just said something undeniably true. Noah wasn't there to take sides, he was there to ask questions that mattered, and everyone in the room could see that. As the exchange continued, the dynamic of the room shifted. Reporters who had been eagerly waiting their turn to ask questions now seemed more interested in watching the unfolding dialogue between Trump and the young boy. Even Trump, who was usually quick to steer conversations back to his talking points, seemed genuinely engaged. "What made you come here today, Noah?" Trump asked, leaning slightly forward. Noah didn't hesitate. "Because I think kids like me should have a voice. We might not be able to vote yet, but we're still affected by the decisions leaders make. I wanted to ask questions that other kids might be too scared to ask." The simplicity of his answer struck a chord with everyone in the room. It wasn't rehearsed or calculated, it was honest. Trump nodded slowly, a rare moment of introspection crossing his face. "Well, I'll say this, Noah," he began, "you're braver than a lot of adults I've met. And you've got a point. Kids are the future, after all. Maybe we should listen to you more often." The crowd clapped again, this time louder than before. Noah's father, standing a few feet behind him, couldn't hide the tears welling up in his eyes. His son had just done something extraordinary. He had not only captured the attention of one of the most influential figures in the world but also reminded everyone in the room of the importance of integrity and courage. As the conference continued, Noah's presence didn't fade into the background. Instead, it became the highlight of the event. Reporters began directing questions to him, curious about what had inspired such a young boy to take an interest in politics. "Noah, how did you come up with that question?" one journalist asked. "I just thought about what matters most," Noah replied simply. "If leaders can't be trusted to tell the truth, then how can they make decisions that are good for everyone? It's not about being popular or winning, it's about doing what's right." The journalist smiled, clearly impressed. "Do you think you'll run for office one day?" Noah grinned for the first time since the event began. "Maybe," he said. "But first, I want to make sure people understand that kids have ideas too. We might not be able to vote yet, but that doesn't mean we don't care." His answer drew another round of applause, and it became clear that Noah had turned what was supposed to be a routine press event into something far more memorable. By the time the press conference ended, Noah had become a sensation. Clips of his exchange with Trump were already making their way onto social media, and hashtags like #NoahPeterson and #KidVoicesMatter began trending within hours. People from all over the country were sharing their thoughts, many praising Noah for his courage and insight. "That boy just said what so many adults are afraid to say," one tweet read. "Can we elect Noah Peterson for president already?" joked another. Even those who were staunch Trump supporters couldn't help but admire the young boy's composure and confidence. "Say what you want about politics," one commenter wrote, "but that kid deserves respect." As Noah and his father drove home that evening, the boy stared out the window, watching the city lights blur past. He felt a strange mix of emotions: pride, relief, and a lingering nervousness about what might come next. "You did something incredible today," his father said, breaking the silence. "Do you think it mattered?" Noah asked, his voice quieter now. "It mattered," his dad replied firmly. "You made people stop and think. That's more than most adults manage to do in a lifetime." Noah smiled, leaning his head against the window. He didn't know what the future held, but for now, he was content knowing that he had done something meaningful. He had spoken up when it mattered most, and in doing so, he had shown the world that even the smallest voices could make the biggest impact. Noah's story didn't end there. In the days and weeks that followed, he received invitations to speak at schools, youth organizations, and even local government meetings. People wanted to hear more from the 7-year-old who had managed to hold his own in a room full of adults. But for Noah, it was never about fame or recognition. It was about making a difference, no matter how small. And as he prepared for his next opportunity to speak, he couldn't help but wonder, what other questions were waiting to be asked. With his notebook in hand and his heart full of determination, Noah knew one thing for sure: this was just the beginning. The tension in the room was thick enough to cut with a knife. Reporters shifted uncomfortably in their seats, their pens frozen mid-note. Supporters glanced at each other, some exchanging puzzled looks, others leaning forward as though they didn't want to miss a single word of what was about to unfold. Trump, never one to back away from an unexpected moment, raised an eyebrow. The amusement in his eyes hinted at his confidence, but there was a flicker of something else. Was it surprise? Intrigue? Maybe both. He chuckled again, leaning toward the microphone. Well now, I've been asked a lot of questions over the years, he said, his voice tinged with curiosity. But I don't think I've ever had someone quite your age take the floor like this. What's your name, kid? Noah Peterson, the boy replied, his tone steady and unwavering. Noah Peterson, Trump repeated, letting the name hang in the air for dramatic effect. All right, Noah, you've got the floor. Honesty over popularity, huh? That's a big question for such a young guy. Some in the audience chuckled nervously, but Noah wasn't laughing. His gaze remained locked on Trump, his small frame radiating a quiet determination. It's not just a big question, Noah replied, his voice firm but polite. It's an important one. Because if leaders aren't honest, how can we trust them to make the right choices? The murmurs in the crowd grew louder. Some nodded in agreement, while others seemed skeptical. Reporters scribbled furiously, their instincts telling them that this moment this tiny boy with a giant question was about to become the story of the day. Trump leaned back slightly, folding his arms as he studied Noah. His expression was hard to read, part amusement, part contemplation. You've got guts, Noah, he said, a smirk playing at the corners of his mouth. But let me ask you something. Do you think honesty always works in the real world? Sometimes, being a leader means making tough choices. Choices that might not always look honest, even if they're for the greater good. It was a classic Trump move, flipping the question back on the questioner. But Noah was ready. He had spent months preparing for this, thinking through every angle, anticipating every possible rebuttal. He didn't hesitate. I think tough choices can still be honest, Noah replied. Honesty doesn't mean telling people what they want to hear. It means telling them what they need to hear, even if it's hard. The crowd erupted into whispers and gasps, some even breaking into scattered applause. The boy's words carried a gravity far beyond his years, and everyone in the room felt it. Trump's smirk faltered for a brief second before returning. Well, you've certainly thought this through, haven't you, he said, his tone lighter, but the challenge still evident. Noah nodded. Yes, sir. I have. Because leaders aren't just people who make decisions. They're examples. And if they don't lead with honesty, how can they expect anyone else to? The murmurs in the room swelled again, this time with a distinct note of admiration. Even the reporters, who were often quick to criticize or challenge, seemed to soften. It was clear this boy wasn't just here to make a scene, he was here to make a point. As the exchange continued, the mood in the room began to shift. What had started as a routine press conference now felt like something far more significant. The reporters who had been eagerly waiting their turn to ask questions found themselves captivated by the back and forth between Trump and Noah. Trump, for his part, seemed to relish the challenge. While he was used to handling tough questions, there was something disarming about facing them from a child. It wasn't just the innocence of the question, it was the clarity and conviction behind it. You know, Noah, Trump said, gesturing toward the boy, you've got a lot of opinions for someone who hasn't even hit double digits yet. Let me ask you this: what do you think makes a good leader? Noah didn't miss a beat. Someone who listens to others, he said. Someone who puts the people's needs above their own. And someone who isn't afraid to admit when they're wrong. The words struck a chord. They were simple, almost painfully so, yet they carried an undeniable truth. The crowd murmured again, this time louder, as though collectively realizing the weight of what had just been said. Trump tilted his head, the faintest hint of a smile on his lips. "Well, you've certainly got some ideas," he said. "Tell me, Noah, are you planning to run for office one day?" Noah grinned for the first time since the exchange began. "Maybe," he said, his tone light but still confident. "But first, I want to make sure leaders today know that kids like me are paying attention." The crowd erupted into applause, this time genuine and sustained. It wasn't just for Noah's courage, it was for his message, a reminder that leadership wasn't just about power or popularity but about values that transcended age or experience. But not everyone in the room was impressed. Among the crowd, there were murmurs of dissent, people questioning whether a child had any place in such a serious discussion. "What does a 7-year-old know about politics?" one man muttered to his companion. Noah heard the whispers but didn't let them shake him. He had expected resistance after all, not everyone was ready to take him seriously. But he had also learned something important from his months of preparation: the best way to prove doubters wrong was to keep speaking the truth. As Trump moved on to other questions, Noah stayed focused, his mind racing with thoughts about what had just happened. He had stood his ground, asked his question, and started a conversation that no one in the room would soon forget. But he also knew this was just the beginning. The real challenge wasn't just asking the question, it was making sure people didn't forget it. After the event, Noah found himself at the center of attention. Reporters approached him, their microphones and cameras trained on the boy who had managed to steal the spotlight. "Noah, why did you choose that question?" one journalist asked. "Because honesty is the foundation of trust," he replied simply. "And without trust, leadership falls apart." Another reporter chimed in. "Do you think leaders today are honest enough?" Noah paused for a moment, his expression thoughtful. "I think some are, and some aren't," he said. "But the ones who aren't need to hear that people are paying attention. Even kids like me." The reporters exchanged glances, clearly impressed. Here was a boy who not only understood the complexities of leadership but also had the courage to speak up about them. Meanwhile, Trump's team huddled nearby, discussing the unexpected turn of events. "Did you see how the crowd responded to that kid?" one advisor said, shaking his head. "Yeah," another replied. "That wasn't just a question, it was a statement." Trump, overhearing the conversation, smiled faintly. "The kid's got guts," he said. "And maybe he's right, maybe we should be listening to the younger generation more often." It was a rare moment of reflection from a man who was more accustomed to commanding the spotlight than sharing it. But even Trump couldn't deny the impact of Noah's words. As the press conference ended and people began filing out, Noah and his father lingered for a moment, watching as the room emptied. "You did it," his dad said, resting a hand on his shoulder. Noah nodded, a small smile on his face. "Yeah," he said quietly. "But this is just the start." And deep down, he knew he was right. This was more than a single question at a press conference, it was a call to action, a reminder that even the smallest voices could spark the biggest conversations. The quiet moment between Noah and his father was short-lived. As they made their way to the exit, a swarm of reporters surrounded them. Cameras flashed, microphones were thrust in their direction, and questions came flying from every angle. "Noah, how long have you been interested in politics? Did you plan to ask that question today, or was it spontaneous? What do you think about Mr. Trump's response?" Noah looked up at his father for reassurance, who gave him an encouraging nod. With a deep breath, the boy turned to face the crowd of reporters. "I've been interested in politics for about 2 years now," he said, his voice calm but firm. "I started paying attention when I realized that the decisions leaders make affect everyone, even kids. I asked my question because I think honesty is something that should matter to everyone, no matter how old they are." The journalists scribbled furiously in their notebooks, their cameras capturing every word. Noah's poise and clarity were unlike anything they'd ever seen from someone his age. "Do you think Mr. Trump gave you a good answer?" one reporter pressed. Noah hesitated for a moment, carefully considering his response. "I think he gave a politician's answer," he said finally. "It's easy to say honesty is important, but it's harder to live by it. I think his answer showed that he's thought about it, but I also think it's up to people like us to hold leaders accountable for their actions, not just their words." The crowd of reporters buzzed with energy. This boy wasn't just precocious, he was insightful. Every answer he gave seemed to carry the weight of someone far beyond his years. As Noah and his father finally broke free from the throng of reporters and made their way to the parking lot, they were stopped once more, this time by an older woman with a kind smile. She introduced herself as a retired teacher and told Noah how impressed she was by his courage. "You remind me of why I became a teacher," she said, her voice warm and genuine. "Young people like you give me hope for the future." "Thank you," Noah replied, his face lighting up with a smile. "I just want to make sure people know that kids care too." The woman nodded, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. "You've already done more than you know, young man. Don't ever stop asking questions." By the time Noah and his father finally got into their car, the adrenaline from the day's events had begun to wear off. Noah leaned back in his seat, exhaustion creeping in. "You were amazing today," his father said as they pulled out of the parking lot. "I'm so proud of you." "Thanks, Dad," Noah replied, his voice soft. "Do you think people really heard what I said?" His father glanced at him in the rearview mirror, a small smile playing at his lips. "I think they heard you loud and clear. And I think a lot of them will be thinking about your words for a long time." Noah nodded, but he couldn't shake the feeling that his work wasn't done. Asking the question was just the first step. Now he had to make sure it didn't get lost in the noise. Over the next few days, news of Noah's question spread like wildfire. Clips of his exchange with Trump went viral on social media, with millions of people sharing and commenting on the video. Hashtags like #NoahPeterson, #HonestyMatters, and #KidVoices trend across platforms. People from all walks of life weighed in on the boy's message. Some praised his bravery and insight, while others questioned whether a child should be involved in such serious discussions. One tweet read, "7 years old and already asking the questions adults are too scared to ask. Noah Peterson is a legend." Another said, "Kids should stay in school, not meddle in politics. What does a 7-year-old know about honesty in leadership?" But for every critic, there were 10 more people who applauded Noah for speaking up. His words had sparked a conversation about the role of honesty in leadership and the importance of listening to younger voices. Noah's newfound fame brought both opportunities and challenges. He was invited to speak at local schools, youth forums, and even a televised panel discussion about the role of young people in shaping the future. At one such event, a high school student approached him after his speech. "You're incredible," she said, her voice filled with admiration. "You've made me realize that I don't have to wait until I'm older to make a difference." "Thank you for that." Noah smiled, feeling a sense of pride and responsibility. "You don't have to wait," he said. "Every voice matters, no matter how young or old you are." But not all interactions were as uplifting. On more than one occasion, Noah encountered skeptics who questioned his motives or dismissed his message as naive. During an interview with a well-known political commentator, Noah was asked, "Do you really think a child can understand the complexities of politics? Isn't it a bit presumptuous to think you know better than seasoned leaders?" Noah took a deep breath, his expression calm but resolute. "I don't think I know better," he said. "I think I see things differently. Sometimes, adults get so caught up in their own ideas that they forget the basics like being honest and doing what's right. Kids like me remind them of that." The commentator fell silent for a moment, visibly impressed by the boy's maturity. Well said, he finally replied, his tone respectful. Through it all, Noah remained grounded. He continued to attend school, play with his friends, and enjoy the simple joys of childhood. But he also kept a close eye on the world around him, always thinking about the next question he wanted to ask. One evening, as he sat at the kitchen table with his notebook, his father walked in and placed a hand on his shoulder. "What are you working on now?" he asked. "I'm thinking about the environment," Noah replied. "I want to ask leaders why they're not doing more to protect it. If the planet isn't healthy, how can we have a future?" His father smiled, pride shining in his eyes. "That's a great question," he said. "And I have no doubt you'll find the right time and place to ask it." Noah looked up at his dad, determination etched across his young face. "I will," he said. "Because someone has to." The story of Noah Peterson wasn't just about a single question at a press conference, it was about the power of speaking up, no matter your age. It was a reminder that even the smallest voices could spark the biggest conversations, and that sometimes, it takes the courage of a child to remind the world of what truly matters. As Noah drifted off to sleep that night, his notebook still open beside him, he knew his journey was far from over. There were more questions to ask, more conversations to start, and more ways to make a difference. And he was ready for all of it. The room buzzed with a mix of shock and awe. Trump's usual confidence seemed to flicker as he searched for the right response. He straightened his tie, his hands resting on the podium as he leaned forward slightly, a trademark gesture that signaled he was ready to engage. "Well, Noah," Trump began, his tone measured, "that's a big topic. A very big topic. And, you know, it's important for leaders to question things when they don't seem right." Noah tilted his head slightly, his expression unyielding. "But isn't it also important for leaders to provide proof when they make those claims? Without proof, doesn't it make people lose trust in elections?" The room erupted into whispers and hurried typing as reporters scrambled to capture the exchange. Cameras zoomed in on the boy, his presence as commanding as the former president's. Trump smiled faintly, though there was a tension in his jaw. "That's a good point, Noah," he said, his voice steady but with an edge of defensiveness. "But sometimes, a leader has to speak out to protect the integrity of the system. It's not about dishonesty, it's about making sure everything is fair." Noah nodded, acknowledging the response but pressing on. "If that's true, then shouldn't a leader also reassure people that the system can work? Instead of just pointing out flaws, isn't it their job to make people believe in it again?" Another ripple of murmurs swept through the room. The boys' questions weren't just sharp, they were piercing straight to the heart of the issue. Reporters exchanged glances, their expressions a mix of disbelief and admiration. As the exchange continued, Noah's confidence only seemed to grow. Trump attempted to deflect, turning to the crowd for support with remarks like, "This kid's tough, huh?" The audience chuckled nervously, but Noah didn't let the moment slip away. "You talk a lot about making America great again," Noah said, his tone steady but insistent. "But how can we do that if people don't trust the very system that makes it great?" The question landed like a hammer. Trump paused, clearly grappling with how to respond. It was rare for him to be cornered in such a public way, and even rarer for it to happen by someone so young. "Well, Noah," Trump said, his voice softer now, "you've got some interesting ideas for a kid your age. Maybe we should get you into politics one day." Noah smiled politely but didn't let the compliment distract him. "I'm not here to talk about me, Mr. Trump. I'm here because I care about the future. And I think every leader should too." The tension in the room was palpable, but beneath it was a growing sense of respect for the boy who had managed to hold his ground. Reporters leaned forward in their seats, hanging on every word. Some of Trump's supporters, who had initially dismissed Noah as a mere distraction, began to nod subtly, recognizing the truth in his words. But not everyone was pleased. A man in the crowd, a staunch supporter of Trump, muttered loudly, "Who does this kid think he is? This is a press conference, not a classroom." Noah heard the comment but chose to ignore it. He had learned early on that distractions only weakened your focus. Instead, he turned back to Trump, his gaze unwavering. "I'm asking these questions because I think they matter," Noah said, his voice rising slightly. "If we don't talk about these things, how can we fix them?" Trump took a deep breath, his expression shifting from amusement to something closer to contemplation. For all his bluster and bravado, he couldn't deny that the boy had struck a chord. As the press conference continued, something unexpected began to happen. The reporters, who had initially focused solely on Trump, started directing their questions toward Noah. "What made you decide to come here today?" one asked. Noah glanced at his father, who gave him an encouraging nod. "Because I think kids have a right to be part of the conversation," Noah replied. "We're going to grow up in the world that adults are shaping now. So why shouldn't we ask questions about it?" Another reporter jumped in. "Do you think your questions will make a difference?" Noah paused for a moment, considering his answer. "I think they already have," he said. "Because now people are talking about things they might not have talked about otherwise. And that's how change starts, with a conversation." The room was silent for a beat, the weight of his words sinking in. Even Trump seemed momentarily taken aback, his usual quick comebacks replaced by a contemplative silence. Behind the scenes, Trump's advisors were in a quiet frenzy. "We need to wrap this up," one of them whispered urgently. "This kid is stealing the show." Another advisor shook his head. "No, let it play out. The crowd loves him, and it makes Trump look open-minded for engaging with him." Trump, ever the showman, seemed to sense this as well. He turned back to Noah with a faint smile. "You know, Noah, you've got a lot of people listening to you right now. What would you say is the most important thing leaders should do for the next generation?" Noah didn't hesitate. "They should listen," he said simply. "Not just to other leaders, but to everyone, the people who voted for them, the people who didn't, and even the kids who can't vote yet. Because every voice matters." The room erupted into applause. It wasn't the polite clapping of a crowd obligated to show support, it was genuine, heartfelt, and sustained. In the days that followed, Noah's words reverberated far beyond the walls of that press conference room. Clips of the exchange flooded social media, sparking debates about honesty, leadership, and the role of young voices in shaping the future. News outlets ran headlines like, "The 7-year-old who held Trump accountable. Noah Peterson, a voice for the next generation. Kid vs. President, who won the debate." Noah, however, wasn't interested in fame. When reporters came to his school or tried to interview him at home, he politely declined most of their requests. "I didn't do this to be on TV," he told one journalist. "I just wanted to ask questions that matter." But even as he tried to return to his normal life, Noah couldn't ignore the impact his words had made. Letters poured in from across the country, some praising his courage, others criticizing him for stepping into a world many believed was too big for a child. One letter, written by an elderly woman from Kansas, stood out to him. It read, "Dear Noah, I'm 83 years old, and I've seen a lot of leaders come and go. Your words reminded me of what real leadership looks like: courage, honesty, and the willingness to ask tough questions. Thank you for reminding us all." Noah read the letter twice, a quiet determination settling over him. He hadn't just started a conversation, he had started something bigger. And he wasn't about to stop now. The story of Noah Peterson wasn't just about a boy standing up to a former president, it was about the power of truth, the courage to ask hard questions, and the belief that even the smallest voices can make the biggest difference. And as the world continued to debate his words, one thing became clear: Noah wasn't just part of the conversation, he was helping to lead it. As the applause in the room faded, Noah took a deep breath. His heart pounded in his chest, but his expression remained steady. For all the attention he was receiving, he felt the weight of what he had started. This wasn't just about one question anymore, it was about the ripples those questions would create. Trump, still at the podium, gestured toward Noah. "You've got a lot of people inspired, kid," he said, his voice carrying a mix of respect and amusement. "Maybe you should be up here answering questions instead of me." The audience chuckled, and Noah smiled faintly, but he wasn't ready to let the moment shift away. "Thank you, Mr. Trump," Noah said, his voice clear and unwavering. "But I think leadership isn't just about answering questions, it's about showing people that their concerns are being heard and acted on. That's what I'm hoping to see more of from everyone in power." The crowd erupted into another round of applause. Noah's words were simple but profound, resonating with people in a way that cut through the usual political noise. After the conference ended, Noah became the center of a media whirlwind. Reporters rushed to him with microphones and cameras, eager to get his perspective on the exchange. "What made you decide to challenge Mr. Trump today?" one reporter asked. Noah glanced at his father before replying. "It wasn't about challenging anyone," he said. "It was about starting a conversation. I think too many people are afraid to ask hard questions because they think they won't be taken seriously. I wanted to show that even kids can ask questions that matter." Another reporter chimed in. "Do you think Mr. Trump answered your questions honestly?" Noah paused, considering his words carefully. "I think he gave the best answers he could in the moment," he said. "But honesty isn't just about words, it's about actions. I think we'll see over time if those actions match the answers he gave." The reporters exchanged impressed glances. This wasn't just a child with a precocious curiosity, this was a boy with a clear understanding of the stakes. In the days following the event, Noah's story continued to dominate headlines. Social media exploded with discussions about his questions and Trump's responses. While some people criticized Noah for being used as a political prop, the overwhelming majority praised his courage and insight. One viral post read, "7 years old and already holding leaders accountable. Noah Peterson gives me hope for the future." Another countered, "Kids should stay out of politics. Let them enjoy their childhood instead of turning them into activists." Noah and his father watched the debates unfold from their small living room. His father would occasionally glance at his son, concerned about how the criticism might affect him. But Noah seemed unfazed. "I knew some people wouldn't like what I said," Noah admitted one evening as they watched a news segment about him. "But isn't that the point of asking hard questions? If everyone agreed, it wouldn't be hard." His father smiled, pride swelling in his chest. "You're right, buddy. And I think you're handling this better than most adults would." Despite the attention, Noah tried to maintain a sense of normalcy. He went to school, played soccer with his friends, and spent evenings doing homework or reading about history and politics. But his life was far from ordinary now. Invitations poured in from schools, community organizations, and even national television shows. Everyone wanted to hear from the boy who had dared to speak up. At first, Noah was hesitant. "I didn't do this to become famous," he told his father one evening. "I just wanted to make people think." "I know," his father replied. "But sometimes, when you do something important, people notice. And that can be a good thing if you use it the right way." After some thought, Noah agreed to participate in a few events, choosing ones that focused on encouraging young people to engage with the world around them. One of his first appearances was at a local youth forum. The room was packed with kids of all ages, along with their parents and teachers. Noah stood on the small stage, his feet barely reaching the floor as he sat in a chair next to the moderator. The moderator smiled at him. "Noah, you've inspired a lot of people with your questions. What advice would you give to other kids who want to make a difference?" Noah thought for a moment before replying. Don't be afraid to ask questions, even if they seem hard or scary. And don't let anyone tell you that your voice doesn't matter. It does. The audience erupted into applause, and Noah's cheeks flushed with a mix of pride and humility. He wasn't used to being the center of attention, but he knew the message was more important than his discomfort. Not everyone welcomed Noah's rise to prominence, though. Some critics accused him of being a puppet for adults with political agendas. Others dismissed his words as naive, saying he couldn't possibly understand the complexities of the issues he was addressing. During one particularly tense interview with a skeptical journalist, Noah was asked, "How do you respond to people who say you're too young to understand politics?" Noah met the journalist's gaze, his expression calm but firm. "I think it's okay to admit I don't know everything," he said. "But I also think that sometimes adults make things more complicated than they need to be. Being honest, treating people fairly, and listening to others shouldn't be complicated." The journalist nodded slowly, visibly impressed by the boy's maturity. "Well said," he admitted. As the months passed, Noah's influence continued to grow. He was invited to participate in a televised roundtable discussion with other young activists, where he spoke about the importance of youth voices in shaping the future. "We're going to inherit this world," he said during the broadcast. "That means we have a right to be part of the decisions being made today. And it's not just about speaking up, it's about listening and working together to find solutions." His words resonated deeply, earning him praise from viewers and panelists alike. Through it all, Noah remained grounded. He continued to focus on his studies, his family, and his friends. But he also kept a running list of questions he wanted to ask in the future, questions about education, climate change, and social justice. One evening, as he sat at the kitchen table with his notebook, his father walked in and ruffled his hair. "Still working, huh?" "Yeah," Noah replied, smiling up at him. "There's so much to learn and so many questions to ask. I just want to make sure I'm ready." His father chuckled, a mix of pride and amazement in his eyes. "You're already more ready than most people, kiddo." Noah's journey was far from over. He had started as a boy with a simple question, but he had become a symbol of courage, curiosity, and the power of youth. And as he continued to ask the questions that others were too afraid to voice, one thing was clear: Noah Peterson wasn't just making waves, he was making history. As Trump extended his hand, the cameras flashed wildly, capturing the moment that would soon dominate headlines. Noah took the handshake but didn't let the moment pass without adding his own weight to it. "Thank you, Mr. Trump," Noah said, looking him square in the eye. "But I think the future belongs to all of us, not just the ones standing at the podium." The crowd erupted into applause. Trump, ever the performer, gave a half smile and nodded as though passing the torch. But it was clear to everyone in the room that this wasn't just a typical exchange between a leader and a young admirer. Noah had shifted the dynamics of the conversation, placing focus squarely on accountability and shared responsibility. What most people didn't realize at that moment was that Noah wasn't just any 7-year-old. Beneath his unassuming appearance and soft-spoken nature lay years of dedication. While other kids played video games or memorized Pokemon stats, Noah had been poring over history books, reading biographies of world leaders, and watching political debates. His sharp questions weren't improvised, they were the product of months of preparation. Noah had been following Trump's policies and speeches closely, writing down questions that even seasoned journalists had hesitated to ask. And it wasn't just about Trump. Noah had a deep interest in the broader principles of leadership, fairness, and honesty. What truly set Noah apart wasn't just his knowledge but his ability to articulate it with precision and respect. He didn't attack Trump or try to embarrass him. Instead, he framed his questions in a way that demanded thought and introspection, not just for Trump but for everyone listening. As the press conference wrapped up, reporters swarmed Noah. His small frame was almost swallowed by the chaos of microphones and cameras. "What made you ask those questions today, Noah?" one reporter shouted. Noah, standing beside his father, adjusted his glasses before replying. "I think it's important for leaders to remember that their words and actions affect everyone, even kids like me. If we're taught to be honest and fair in school, then shouldn't adults follow the same rules?" Another reporter chimed in. "Do you think Mr. Trump answered your questions honestly?" Noah tilted his head thoughtfully. "I think he answered them as honestly as he could in the moment. But honesty isn't just about what you say, it's about what you do afterward. So, I guess we'll have to see what happens next." His response was met with a mixture of laughter and nods of approval. It was clear that Noah wasn't just repeating talking points, he was thinking critically and holding his ground in the face of scrutiny. By the time Noah left the venue, social media was ablaze. Clips of his exchange with Trump were being shared across platforms with captions like, "The 7-year-old who outshined the politicians. Future president? Meet Noah Peterson, the boy who dared to question Trump." Noah's questions remind us of what politics should be about: honesty and accountability. But not all the reactions were positive. Critics accused his parents of coaching him or using him as a prop for their own agenda. Some dismissed him entirely, claiming he was just a kid who didn't understand the complexities of politics. Noah's father shielded him from the harsher comments, but when Noah overheard some of the criticism, he simply shrugged. "If they're talking about me, that means they're thinking about the questions. That's all that matters." What made Noah's moment so powerful wasn't just the questions he asked but what they represented: a new wave of young voices demanding to be heard. Youth activists from around the world began reaching out to Noah, inspired by his courage. "You've shown that age doesn't matter," one message read. "It's about the willingness to speak up." Organizations focused on civic engagement for young people invited Noah to join their initiatives. He became a keynote speaker at several events, sharing his story and encouraging other kids to get involved. "I'm not saying everyone has to care about politics," he said during one speech. "But everyone should care about fairness and honesty. And if you see something that doesn't feel right, don't be afraid to ask why." In the days following the conference, Trump addressed the exchange during a televised interview. "The kid's sharp, I'll give him that," Trump admitted. "It's good to see young people taking an interest in these things. It shows that the future's in good hands." While some viewed his comments as gracious, others speculated that the exchange had rattled Trump more than he let on. Analysts dissected the moment, pointing out how Noah's questions had put him on the defensive in a way that few adults had managed to do. Despite the whirlwind of attention, Noah remained grounded. One evening, as he sat at the dinner table with his family, his mother asked, "How do you feel about everything that's happened?" Noah took a moment to think. "I feel like I did what I set out to do. But there's still so much more to ask. I want people to keep thinking about what makes a good leader, not just today but every day." His father nodded. "You've done something amazing, Noah. Just remember, the most important thing is to stay true to yourself." The press conference marked a turning point not just for Noah but for the larger conversation about youth involvement in politics. Schools began incorporating discussions about leadership and civic responsibility into their curricula, often citing Noah's example as inspiration. Years later, when asked about the moment that sparked his lifelong passion for advocacy, Noah would always point back to that day. "It wasn't about being famous or proving anyone wrong," he'd say. "It was about reminding people that even the smallest voices can ask the biggest questions." And in that room, on that day, Noah Peterson proved just that. As the world digested what had happened during the press conference, Noah's story began to take on a life of its own. For many, he wasn't just a precocious child asking tough questions, he was a symbol of accountability, a reminder that even the youngest voices could hold the powerful to task. But for Noah, the attention was both humbling and overwhelming. Back at home, Noah's family tried to maintain some sense of normalcy. His mother reminded him to finish his schoolwork, and his father insisted that they continue their weekly family game nights. But the flood of media requests, invitations to events, and even messages from politicians were impossible to ignore. One evening, as the family gathered around the dinner table, Noah's father addressed the growing momentum. "Son, what you did was brave. But it's okay to step back if it feels like too much." Noah, thoughtful as ever, put down his fork. "I don't want to stop," he said simply. "I know this is bigger than me. If people are listening, I want to keep asking questions. It's what I'm meant to do." His parents exchanged a look of both pride and concern. Noah wasn't just a kid who loved debates, he was someone who felt a deep sense of responsibility. What many didn't know was that Noah's moment at the press conference wasn't just a spur-of-the-moment decision. He had spent months preparing. He'd read about leadership, studied public speaking techniques, and even practiced his questions in front of a mirror. "I knew I might only get one chance," Noah later admitted during an interview. "I wanted to make it count." His father, who had been quietly supporting Noah's passion from the start, played a crucial role. He helped Noah research key topics and encouraged him to think critically about the issues he cared about. But he was careful not to push. "This was always Noah's mission," his father explained. "I just gave him the tools he needed to follow through." The press conference moment continued to ripple through social media and news cycles. Late-night talk show hosts referenced Noah in their monologues, with one joking, "When a 7-year-old has better questions than half the reporters in the room, you know it's time to step up your game." But amidst the jokes and admiration, serious conversations were emerging. Political commentators debated the substance of Noah's questions, and educators praised his example as a way to inspire civic engagement in schools. One prominent journalist wrote an op-ed titled, "Noah Peterson, the wake-up call we didn't know we needed," arguing that his ability to cut through the noise highlighted a growing hunger for authenticity in leadership. Of course, not everyone was impressed. Some detractors accused Noah of being a mouthpiece for adult agendas. Others dismissed his questions as overly simplistic, arguing that he lacked the experience to truly understand the complexities of governance. One particularly harsh critic on a cable news program scoffed, "He's just a kid. This is nothing more than political theater." When Noah's father showed him the segment, worried it might upset him, Noah simply shrugged. "If they're spending their time criticizing me, it means they're avoiding the questions. That's not my problem, it's theirs." His calm, mature response only deepened his parents' admiration for him. What surprised many was Trump's reaction in the days following the event. In an interview with a major news network, Trump spoke about Noah with uncharacteristic warmth. "The kid's sharp. I mean, really sharp," Trump said. "I wasn't expecting that kind of question, let alone from someone so young. You've got to respect that. He's got a bright future ahead of him." Trump's acknowledgement softened some of the criticism Noah faced, but it also raised questions. Had Noah's words genuinely made an impression on the former president? Or was it a strategic move to align himself with the growing admiration for the boy? Noah, for his part, didn't dwell on the motives. "If it makes people think, then it's a good thing," he said simply when asked about Trump's comments. As Noah's story continued to spread, it became clear that his moment wasn't just a flash in the pan. Schools began inviting him to speak at assemblies, and community leaders sought his input on how to engage young people in civic activities. During one such event, a teacher asked Noah what he thought made a good leader. His answer was as thoughtful as ever. "A good leader is someone who listens, even when they don't like what they hear," he said. "It's someone who admits when they're wrong and works to make things better for everyone, not just the people who agree with them." The audience erupted into applause, and Noah's words were shared widely online. Behind the scenes, the mentorship program that had initially brought Noah to the press conference became a key part of his journey. The program's director, a former senator named Margaret Hall, was deeply impressed by Noah's poise and insight. "You've got a rare gift," she told him during one of their meetings. "But more importantly, you've got the courage to use it. That's something even adults struggle with." Under her guidance, Noah began to refine his skills even further. He learned about policy making, public service, and the importance of collaboration. But Margaret was careful to remind him, it's not about being the smartest person in the room. It's about making sure everyone in the room has a voice. Noah took those words to heart, incorporating them into his speeches and conversations. Noah's questions at the press conference had set off a chain reaction. Across the country, young people began organizing debates, writing letters to their representatives, and speaking out on issues they cared about. One high school student, inspired by Noah, started a club focused on civic engagement. "If a 7-year-old can stand up and make a difference," she said, "then what's stopping us?" Another young boy sent Noah a handwritten letter. "Dear Noah, I used to think politics was boring, but now I see it's important. You showed me that kids can make a difference too. Thank you." Noah kept that letter on his desk, a reminder of why he had started this journey in the first place. One of the most moving moments came when Noah met a veteran who had watched the press conference. The man, a retired Marine, approached Noah during an event and shook his hand. "Son, I've seen a lot in my time, but I've never been as proud of our future as I am right now," he said, his voice thick with emotion. Noah's eyes widened, and for a moment, he was speechless. "Thank you, sir," he finally managed, his voice trembling slightly. The veteran nodded. "Keep asking the tough questions. It's what this country needs." As the weeks turned into months, Noah's influence only grew. But through it all, he remained the same thoughtful, curious boy who had dared to ask the first question. Being honest, standing up for what's right, and listening to others, that's what makes a good leader, he often said. And in his own quiet way, Noah Peterson was becoming exactly that. And the world was watching, waiting to see what questions he would ask next. Noah's words didn't just linger in the room that day, they resonated across the nation. Social media exploded with hashtags like #NoahSpeaksTruth and #FutureLeader. People from all walks of life began sharing the video of his exchange with Trump, praising his courage and clear-eyed honesty. But Noah wasn't focused on the praise or the newfound fame. Instead, he was thinking about what came next. For him, the press conference wasn't the end of the conversation, it was just the beginning. The very next day, news outlets began analyzing the moment with fervor. Political commentators dissected Noah's questions, discussing the broader implications for leadership and transparency. Some pointed out how his simple, direct approach had cut through the usual political spin, forcing Trump to confront issues that even seasoned journalists struggled to address. More importantly, Noah's questions sparked a broader dialogue about honesty in leadership. Editorials appeared in newspapers, asking if public figures could rise to the challenge posed by a 7-year-old. Panels on morning shows debated the importance of rebuilding trust in political systems. One commentator summed it up perfectly: if a child can ask these questions with such clarity and conviction, why can't our leaders answer them with the same honesty? In classrooms across the country, teachers began using Noah's story as a teaching tool. Students were encouraged to think critically about leadership and to ask tough questions of their own. Some schools even organized debates and town hall-style discussions, inspired by Noah's example. One teacher in Iowa wrote to Noah's parents, saying, "Your son has reminded us that kids can be a powerful force for change. His courage has inspired my students to speak up about the issues they care about." Children as young as Noah started writing letters to local officials, asking about policies and decisions that affected their communities. "If Noah can do it, so can we," one letter read. As Noah's questions continued to spark discussions, pressure mounted on Trump and other leaders to provide more transparent answers. Advocacy groups began citing Noah's words in campaigns, calling for greater accountability in government. Trump, known for his quick wit and sharp retorts, found himself in an unusual position. Instead of brushing off the moment, he addressed it again during a televised interview. "I'll be honest," Trump said, "that kid made me think. And if there's one thing we need more of, it's people no matter their age asking tough questions. It keeps us on our toes." The acknowledgement was a small but significant victory for those advocating for honesty and integrity in leadership. It showed that even someone as experienced as Trump couldn't ignore the power of a well-timed, well-thought-out question. Meanwhile, Noah's impact didn't go unnoticed. Advocacy organizations and civic groups began reaching out, offering him awards and inviting him to speak at events. While his parents were cautious about overexposing their son, they recognized the importance of the platform he now had. During one award ceremony, Noah stood on a stage in front of hundreds of people, clutching a small plaque. He adjusted his glasses and spoke into the microphone. "This isn't about me," he began, his voice steady. "It's about the questions we all need to ask. It's about making sure that the people in charge remember who they're leading and why. If my questions made even one person think, then I've done my job." The audience erupted into applause, but Noah remained humble, stepping back from the microphone with a small smile. Not everyone had been kind to Noah in the aftermath of the press conference. Some critics continued to dismiss him as a coached child or claimed his parents were using him for their own agendas. But as Noah's consistent authenticity became clear, many of those voices began to soften. Even some of his harshest detractors admitted that his poise and thoughtfulness were genuine. One prominent commentator who had initially criticized Noah wrote an op-ed titled, "When a Child Teaches Us All a Lesson." In it, he admitted, "I underestimated Noah Peterson. He reminded us all of the power of simple, honest questions. For that, I owe him an apology." As Noah's story continued to grow, so did its impact. Inspired by his courage, youth organizations began rallying around the idea of empowering kids to engage with politics and community leadership. One group launched a campaign called the Noah Effect, aimed at encouraging young people to take an active role in civic life. The campaign provided resources for kids to learn about government, ask questions, and organize initiatives in their communities. Noah was invited to join the campaign as an honorary ambassador, and though he was hesitant at first, his father reminded him, "This is your chance to make a real difference." Noah agreed, but with one condition: "It's not about putting my name on things. It's about helping other kids speak up, too." The press conference may have been the spark, but the fire it ignited showed no signs of dying down. Noah's questions became a rallying cry for accountability, inspiring both young and old to rethink their roles in shaping the future. One evening, as Noah sat on the porch with his father, he asked, "Do you think it really made a difference?" His father smiled, placing a hand on his shoulder. "You've reminded people of something important, Noah. That's more than most people do in a lifetime." Noah nodded, his face thoughtful. "I guess there's still more work to do, though." "There always is," his father replied. And with that, Noah looked out at the horizon, already thinking about the next question he would ask, the next leader he would challenge, and the next change he could help inspire. Because for Noah Peterson, the journey was just beginning and the world was ready to listen. Sometimes, the most profound questions come from the most unexpected places. A child's voice, small and seemingly insignificant, can often carry more weight than the loudest speeches of the most experienced leaders. Noah Peterson's story is a testament to this truth. At just 7 years old, he showed the world that wisdom doesn't come with age, it comes from asking the right questions at the right time, and from standing firm in the face of uncertainty. Noah didn't have decades of experience or a long list of credentials that would normally give someone authority in the political world. He wasn't a seasoned politician, nor was he a journalist with years of training. What he had was something much more powerful, the courage to speak up, the curiosity to learn, and the belief that even a child's voice could make a difference. That day, in front of a room full of reporters, politicians, and powerful figures, Noah was not just another child asking a simple question. He was a force that shook the foundations of what it means to be a leader. His questions were sharp, insightful, and clear, challenging the very principles many adults had taken for granted. His words made people think, and for the first time in a long while, they couldn't simply dismiss him because of his age. It was a powerful reminder that the future of leadership is not solely in the hands of the powerful or the wealthy. It's in the hands of those brave enough to speak up, to challenge what is wrong, and to demand better. Whether it's a child asking tough questions or a young adult pushing for change, the future of leadership belongs to those who are willing to question the status quo, even when they're told they're too young or too inexperienced to make an impact. What Noah Peterson's moment in the spotlight showed us is that change often comes from the most unexpected sources. It's easy to think that leaders are defined by their titles, their experience, or the amount of power they hold. But in reality, true leadership is about making a difference. It's about having the courage to step forward and say, "This isn't right, and I want to do something about it." And that's exactly what Noah did. Noah wasn't concerned with fame or recognition. He wasn't looking for applause or approval from the adults around him. He simply wanted to know why things were the way they were and whether those things were good enough. And when he spoke with conviction. His questions weren't just about politics or policies. They were about honesty, integrity, and the kind of leadership that sets an example for everyone, regardless of age. In a world where so many people are afraid to speak their truth or challenge authority, Noah's story has reminded us of the importance of doing just that. It doesn't matter how old you are, or how much experience you have. What matters is whether you are willing to stand up for what's right and to speak out when something needs to be said. His simple yet powerful questions have inspired countless others to follow his example. Young people everywhere began to realize that their voices, too, mattered. They started to ask questions of their own, demanding answers from their leaders and pushing for change in their communities. Whether it was in schools, in local governments, or even in families, Noah's legacy began to spread, a reminder that we all have a role to play in shaping the future. For Noah, the journey didn't end with that press conference. His bravery had sparked something larger, something that could change the course of history. But Noah knew that the work wasn't over. He understood that leadership was not about waiting for the perfect moment, it was about making the moment count. And while he was proud of the impact he had already made, he knew there were still more questions to ask, more challenges to face, and more people to inspire. And perhaps that's the most inspiring part of his story, he's just getting started. At 7 years old, Noah had already made his mark on the world. But rather than letting the attention and praise go to his head, he remained focused on the bigger picture. He understood that leadership isn't about personal gain, it's about collective progress. It's about helping others see the importance of speaking out, even when the path forward isn't clear. Noah's bravery is a call to action for all of us. It's a reminder that we don't have to wait for permission to make a difference. We don't need to be in positions of power to be heard. All we need is the courage to speak our truth, the wisdom to ask the right questions, and the determination to keep pushing forward. We all have the power to influence change. Whether we're young or old, experienced or just beginning our journey, we have the ability to question the world around us, to challenge the systems that aren't working, and to demand better. Just like Noah, we can each make a difference in our own way. As Noah's story continued to unfold, more and more young people began to see the value of asking questions. They realized that being young doesn't mean they have to stay silent. In fact, sometimes it's their perspective, the fresh eyes of a child, that can see what others might miss. And with the world changing faster than ever, it's the next generation that will have to lead the way. The truth is, leadership isn't about age. It's about courage. It's about vision. And it's about standing up for what you believe in, even when no one else expects it? The future of leadership, as Noah Peterson proved, might just belong to those bold enough to challenge it, no matter their age. Noah's story will be told for years to come, not just because of the moment he created with Donald Trump, but because of the larger message he sent to the world. He reminded us all that true leadership isn't about power or fame. It's about using your voice for change, standing firm when others doubt you, and always asking the important questions. So, the next time you find yourself wondering if you're too young or too inexperienced to make a difference, think of Noah Peterson. Remember that it's not your age or your title that defines your ability to lead, it's your heart, your courage, and your willingness to speak up when it matters the most. The world is waiting for more voices like Noah's. And if you're willing to stand up, ask the tough questions, and lead with integrity, you might just be the one to change the world next.